When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. And suddenly from heaven there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues, as of fire, appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages, as the Spirit gave them ability. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. Awe came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as they had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them.
It happens every now and then that we find ourselves in a crowd of people in what we assume is an ordinary moment, when suddenly we are struck by the palpable sense that something is happening between us, something invisible yet real, something we can't quite name but we unmistakably feel, as if God had just entered the building, or a spirit had swept through the room and connected every person there. Maybe we're standing shoulder to shoulder at a concert as our voice dissolves into the chorus of thousands of others. Or maybe we're sitting in a stadium that all at once erupts in a roar of applause. Or in a candlelight sanctuary humming with silence. Or marching at a protest downtown, or at a vigil singing or praying in shared grief or hope. Whatever it is, we didn't plan it. We didn't manufacture it. We didn't even see it coming. And yet, suddenly, we feel more alive, more awake, more deeply connected to the people around us, to some higher purpose, or to something much larger than ourselves. Sociologists have a name for such experiences. They call it collective effervescence. These rare and powerful moments when a group of people becomes more than a collection of individuals, when shared emotion and meaning and unity sweep over a crowd, evoking awe and wonder, stirring our spirits, widening our vision, binding strangers together. As a lifelong fan of the Irish rock band U2, I've often heard people describe a U2 concert as a spiritual experience. Many even say that it feels like going to church. Having seen U2 in concert more than a dozen times, I can testify to this truth. There always comes a moment during a live performance when I feel an unexpected catch in my throat, a swelling in the chest, as if I were encountering something spacious, transcendent, even worshipful. A sheesh moment. And when I look at the faces of those around me, I can see that this feeling of awe has swept over the entire crowd, turning an ordinary arena into something more like a cathedral, suffused with prayerful yearning and the raw liturgy of exuberance and joy. Tens of thousands of people singing and swaying the music. Individual identities begin to fade. A shared emotional field takes over. And the crowd is no longer simply listening to the music, but being carried by it. It's called collective effervescence. And it's another expression of what we might call a sheesh moment, one of those sudden flashes of awe that washes over us and makes us feel smaller and more connected to the whole, when our breath catches, our defenses soften, and we realize that we're standing in the presence of something we cannot explain. Sheesh. It's the soul's reflex to wonder. It's what we say when beauty overwhelms us, when goodness disarms us, when grace interrupts our carefully managed lives. It's the quiet exhale that slips out whenever it occurs to us that there is more going on here than we can name. Sheesh. When such moments happen in the presence of others, that is, when they happen between us, they can be profoundly moving, catalytic, even transformative. When voices blend, when a room grows still, when an energy pulses through a crowd and a spirit takes hold of a community, a power is unleashed, a force spills into the world. Such power can be used for good or for evil. It can be persuasive or coercive. It can build up or it can tear down. On this Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, we remember 62 years ago how Dr. King stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and stirred the hearts of 250,000 people with a moving speech about a daring dream for America, a beautiful moment of collective effervescence. 5 years ago, 2,500 protesters gathered just blocks from that same site to storm the Capitol building, assaulting police officers, desecrating the halls of Congress, threatening the lives of our elected leaders. A sad and tragic moment of collective effervescence. Sometimes these moments of shared awe can spark a hive mind mentality that leads to violence. But we shouldn't dismiss their transformative power for doing good. In an awe-starved world, we need more moments of collective effervescence in our lives. And long before we had a name for these moments, people of faith experienced them and even sought them out. Scripture has always insisted that God shows up not only within us, but among us and between us. In fact, this is most often how God shows up: in gathered bodies, in shared worship, in mass migrations, in sacred assemblies, and in holy interruptions that remind us that we belong to one another and we belong to something greater than ourselves. And that's why the scene we encounter in the second chapter of Acts feels so familiar. It's the day of Pentecost in the story, that is 50 days after Easter. The followers of Jesus are listless and aimless. They have no vision, no purpose, no nerve, no unity. And then it happens. God's Spirit comes to them, sweeps over them, stirs them to life. But it's how the Spirit comes to them that is so telling about how God so often works in the world. God's Spirit doesn't descend on a single solitary seeker tucked away in some private chapel. God's Spirit comes when the people are all together, it says, in one place. The rushing wind, the flames of fire, the sound of people speaking in tongues, it all sounds so awe-inspiring and impressive. But the real miracle here, the real miracle is not the spectacle. The real miracle is this divine human connection that ignites a sense of community, a shared life and purpose and vision. What's truly awe-inspiring is how this collective encounter with God's Spirit breaks down walls, erases borders, transcends individual identities so that fear gives way to courage, isolation gives way to belonging, difference gives way to unity. Strangers suddenly recognize each other as kin. The scattered people find themselves knit together into a living, breathing community. What happens in this moment is not just a personal spiritual awakening, but a shared one. The Spirit moves through the spaces between them, turning what was once just a collection of individual believers into a vibrant community of devoted practitioners, creating a surge of vitality and purpose and joy so powerful that it spills out into the streets and reshapes how they live together and redefines their mission in the world. And suddenly they see how they really need one another, how they can actually live out their faith apart from one another. And so they begin to gather regularly to eat and to worship together, to share their possessions so that no one else has any need. In other words, awe did not remain just a momentary feeling. It became their way of life. The wonder they experienced in this sheesh moment flowed directly into generosity and hospitality and mutual care for one another. And this is what collective effervescence looks like when it takes root. A community so swept up in God's presence that it begins to reflect God's character. Open eyes, open hands, open hearts, open tables, and a shared life that is so compelling that it becomes a witness to the world. What would it mean for us to live this way? Because we all know we're living in a time of unprecedented social isolation and disconnection. Even before the pandemic, sociologists warned us about a growing epidemic of loneliness. Then came about 2 years of social distancing and disruption that reshaped our relational habits, narrowed our worlds. And we learned then how to stay safe by staying apart, how to scroll instead of socialize, how to comment instead of converse, how to troll instead of tend to our neighbors. And then a tsunami of political disruption and polarization followed. And the social gap has grown ever wider. And we now relate almost exclusively to people who look like us, think and believe like us, vote like us, and agree with us. So that difference feels threatening and disagreement feels personal. Discomfort feels triggering. And the space between us feels more brittle and tense by the moment. And while we are more connected digitally than ever before, we have never felt more alone, more suspicious, more weary, and more numb. The evidence is stark. Americans today have fewer close friends than ever before and spend less time with the friends they do have. 1 in 3 adults report feeling lonely. A growing number of us cannot name a single close friend. Participation in churches, synagogues, and community organizations has dropped to historic lows in America. Our trust in one another, our sense of common purpose, our pride in our country have all, according to the latest data, eroded. Columnist David Brooks refers to what we're all living through right now as, quote, the great detachment. The more we try to maximize our personal independence and autonomy to live unrestricted lives, the more we live lives deprived of awe and passion and love for people, places, for God, and vocation. And Brooks reminds us that if we can resist this autonomy ethos, as he calls it, and put love and connection at the center of our lives again, while we may find ourselves tied down by obligations like community or God or vocation, our love for these things will actually fuel fires in the heart and produce more vitality and awe in our lives. It's like what the psychologist Erich Fromm once said, the deepest need of man is the need to overcome his separateness, to leave the prison of his aloneness. Acts 2 doesn't offer us a strategy for fixing any of this, but it does offer us a vision of what it looks like when a community is formed not by ideology or even affinity, but by the Spirit. It looks like people who show up for one another and share meals and pray for each other and open their hearts and hands, even their homes, to one another. refusing to let separateness have the last word. To live this way now would mean taking the risk of being together again, across differences, beyond our comfort zones. Trusting that the same Spirit who once gathered a fractured people into a living, breathing community is still at work today, ready to do so again among us. If it sounds like too much work at a time when we're already weary and worn out by the madness and chaos of these times, know that the Spirit is already doing this work for us and doing it among us in moments and places that aren't even overtly religious or even assumed to be sacred. We need to look for them in the world. They're all around us. Frederick Buechner wrote once about visiting SeaWorld in Orlando years ago. Buechner, his wife, and their 20-year-old daughter at the time were watching a killer whale show where 5 or 6 whales were performing. This was years before anyone actually questioned whether capturing marine mammals for theatrical purposes was ethical or humane. But Buechner said the delight of the crowd appeared matched only by what seemed to be the delight of the whales. And something extraordinary was happening. He said it was as if the whole of creation, men, women, beasts, sun, water, earth, sky, maybe even God, were caught up in what he calls a dance of unimaginable beauty, a dance of unmitigated light and shared joy. And Buechner said he realized, to his surprise, that his eyes had filled with tears. And after the show was over, he mentioned this experience to his wife and daughter, who each said the same thing had happened to them. Caught up in a dance of unimaginable beauty, a dance of unmitigated light and joy. Even the natural world participates in these sheesh moments, when we sense that something is going on here that we can't explain, something real and visceral. They happen in ordinary places and in sacred places, among complete strangers and in circles and communities of deep love and faith, like a church. They all suggest that sheesh moments aren't anything we can chase or manufacture, nor are they something we can even control or possess. Instead, they're something we make room for. They don't arrive on demand, but emerge when we dare to show up and pay attention, when we risk being present to one another, with open hearts and open eyes and open hands. The sheesh moments we long for, and those we so desperately need, are rarely solitary experiences. They happen when voices blend, when stories are shared, when bread is broken, when tears fall and laughter rises in the presence of others. They happen in sanctuaries, living rooms, around dinner tables and campfires, in protests and marches and vigils, in moments of shared silence and song. They happen whenever the Spirit decides to show up, and they turn the space between us into holy ground. And that's why Jesus says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'm there with them. Because sheesh is shared. This is how the Spirit moves, not just in individual hearts, but among gathered people. And when we cultivate spaces of presence and welcome and shared life, awe has a way of showing up, not as spectacle, but as connection. Not as escape, but as true belonging. Not as a fleeting feeling, but as a force that reshapes how we live and love. And this is why worship matters. This is why our tables matter. This is why showing up, even when it's inconvenient, matters. So the invitation is both simple and brave. To dare to be with one another, to gather, to linger, to listen, to sing, to eat, to pray, to make room for the Spirit to do what the Spirit has always done, turning these ordinary moments into holy ones, and ordinary crowds into communities of grace. Because sometimes when we are truly together, when we are open and attentive and present, God shows up in the space between us. And all we can say is, Sheesh. Our takeaways for today, this week, choose presence over convenience. That is, show up to worship, to the table, to one another, trusting that awe often meets us when we dare to be with others. Number 2, practice lingering. Slow down long enough to listen and to notice, to stay, because wonder rarely arrives in a hurry. And finally, share ordinary life together. Eat with someone. Sit with someone in their need. Serve alongside someone. Believe that God still turns simple moments into holy ones.